This is America ReFramed, and I'm your host, Natasha Del Toro. As you've just seen in Cambodian Son, Kasal Kiev is exiled from the U.S. to Cambodia, while his family in California struggles to heal from the loss. Here to help us understand how Cambodian and other Southeast Asian communities are dealing with a history of war and separation are Mia-lia Kiernan from the One Love movement and Chanravy Proeung from the Southeast Asian Freedom Network. Mia-lia, Chanravy, welcome.
Thank you.
So in the film, Kasal calls himself a Khmer exiled American. He and the other deportees that we meet in the film consider the U.S. their home. Chanravy, talk to me a little bit about this sense of dislocation.
I think the sense of dislocation comes from a long history of displacement, really displacement due to war and genocide, and then resettlement in camps, like refugee camps, all the way to resettlement in the U.S. And that period of time after the Vietnam War and the Cambodian genocide was a really tough time for the community in terms of assimilating and adjusting to two cultures, an American culture and a really traditional Cambodian culture. The sense of dislocation also comes from family separation. It comes from the death of family members during the war, during genocide, but also losing families as we were displaced and resettled in different communities, different cities throughout the nation. And that is continuous in our community and is an ongoing battle. So, for example, you see that Kasal is in Cambodia, and at home he has his mother and his whole family. So there's that actual location of displacement, right? There's thousands and thousands of miles in between them.
Mia-lia, talk to me about how U.S. immigration policy is creating more separation.
Yeah, in 1996, there was an immigration reform bill that passed. And so within those laws at that time, there were really harsh restrictions on people who had any kind of criminal history. What it did was widen the definition of aggravated felony under immigration law to include things like minor, nonviolent misdemeanor crimes. They also took a person's right to due process away. After 1996, deportation for criminal conviction was mandatory, so your right to have your case heard was stripped from you.
So in the film, we see that Kasal, for gang-related crime, was deported. If you could talk to me about the link between crime and immigration for Southeast Asian youth.
So there is a particular experience that the Southeast Asian community has with gang affiliations and the development of gangs. When the community was resettled in the U.S. In the early 70s, one of the biggest issues is that people didn't speak English. Right? There was linguistical issues, but there's also a barrier of economic development. Right? So there was a dependency on the state and the government to provide for the community, and eventually that support was pulled back by the U.S. Right? So that left a community in a constant perpetuation of poverty. Poverty leads to a lot of issues with crime and violence.
You have other Southeast Asian communities like Vietnamese and Laotian Americans who also struggled to rebuild after war and resettlement. Chanravy, what unites these communities?
Our struggle with war, our struggle with resettlement and experience with trauma, our struggle to rebuild our communities, the shared experience of the war in Vietnam and how it permeated to every country outside of Vietnam, besides Thailand, who was able to remain neutral and stay neutral.
And I think in the U.S., what unites Southeast Asian communities is invisibility within the Asian American community as a whole, right? So when you think about Asian Americans and the narrative of that, it's mostly centered around East Asian narratives. We're funneled into this narrative of the model minority Asian American.
We have framed it as 40 years of resilience. 40 years since the war ended. It's been a tough battle, but I think that 40 years of just constant separation, constant trauma, and having to deal with healing has been a multi-layer battle.
Mia-lia, Chanravy, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your insights about the Cambodian community and other Southeast Asian communities. Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
you.
Natasha.